Thank you for listening to the Living Zen-podcast. If you've been listening for a while and are wondering how you can take the next step in developing your own Zen practice, or how you can more formally connect with our community, please explore our online Orientation to Zen practice, which you can find on our website at zenwest.ca. If you enjoy the resources that we make available online, we would very much appreciate your support. There are a number of ways that you can help us continue to do the work we do. One of the best ways is by becoming a part of our community as an associate. Your commitment of $10 a month will ensure that offerings like the Living Zen-podcast, eZendo, and our online Orientation to Zen will continue to be available around the world to everyone with an interest in truly living Zen. To become an associate, please visit our website at zenwest.ca and click on Become an Associate. Many more Zen Talks are available for purchase on iTunes and at Amazon.com. Just search for Venerable Eshu Martin. These talks are also made available for free on our website for all of our members and associates. You may also want to download the Living Zen Podcast app, which makes downloading and listening to the podcast effortless. Thank you for your support, and thank you for listening to Living Zen. So your question is, at the end of the circle,
you bow, is it to the Shoji?
Yeah, basically, in Zen form, it's always about relationship, right? So when a server is approaching a line to start serving, the person that they're, it's like lines. Whenever we walk in a line, we look at it as being a connected unit. We're one thing, right? So whenever a server is serving a line of people, they bow to begin the relationship with the first person in the row, and that person bows back. If they don't have anything in their hand, you bow with both hands, right? If you have a cup in your hand, you can bow with one hand, right? And the server has two hands on whatever they're serving, they bow. And then they don't bow until the end, so they continue to serve down the line, and then when they get to the end and the relationship is complete with that line, they finish serving the last person, and then those two people bow. And part of it is that you're, on both sides, you're practicing an awareness. Like when we do a formal meal service, it's really, I love the meal services because they require this level of connection with what you're doing, with the whole environment. Because sometimes if it's a bigger group, there can be multiple servers going on. They're each serving something different. Each thing goes in a different dish, and there's, different, and you have to be sort of paying attention and all the time sort of also paying attention to the fact that you're eating as well. So the relationship, if we're chatting with our neighbor, blah, 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 the person comes, we've got to stop that, completely embrace it, the person that's coming in front of us. We bow, we engage in this serving, and then they continue down, and then when it gets to the end, they bow and complete the relationship. Does that make sense? Okay.
When I was reading the contexts
Mm-hmm.
to Zen Buddhism, and you also mentioned in today's lecture that everything is connected.
Mm-hmm.
But I find it really challenging to implement this idea in my real life. Like if I know someone wrong, if I know someone mischief, if I do not like someone for very obvious and patent reason,
Mm-hmm.
how I feel equanimity with that person, how I feel like harmony with that person.
I think the mistake is the idea that because you're connected with something means that you have to be harmonious with what you're connected with. And I don't think that's true. Water and rocks are two different things, but they connect, right? Like if you go down to the beach, you can see that they're in relationship. Any relationship that you have is a testament or is a demonstration of a connection. It doesn't mean that just because you're in relationship with something that you need to respond to that in kind, in the same sort of manner. But just because you're responding differently, or just because you don't like it, to get into preferences, you don't like it, doesn't diminish the fact that you're connected to it. And it's not so much a matter of sort of feeling approving or feeling sort of positive about everything that you're connected with. The first part is just accepting that the connection is there, and how you respond to something can actually transform how that's going on. So it's not necessarily, someone comes at you and it's aggression. You don't like it. So there's the sort of divisive way of dealing with that is to sort of create a mental separation between that person and yourself and try to deal with it from that approach. And that usually ends up with a kind of combative approach. I'm trying to beat or sort of master the other, right? And then the other way of looking at it, if we accept relationship, if we accept interconnection, is saying the way that this thing is coming at me is problematic. And it requires you to step outside of a habitual response, which is always sort of fight-flight kind of response, and to apply skill. And that requires a sort of spaciousness and equanimity, is the word that you use, which is correct, in yourself, in order to meet or address that situation, which also can pull that person out of their fight-flight sort of separation relationship. You were talking about an interaction, and I thought that the way that you described it was very instructive, in that when we're dealing with people or situations, environment, let's stick to people, we're often dealing with people as if they're objects, separate things. And we can deal with things like that, but that's where I think a lot of the time the sort of separate me or you fight or flight responses come from, is when we're looking at people as objects. With a very simple word or gesture or acknowledgement, we can transform this relationship from the bumping into of objects to collaboration of human beings. We recognize, the term the way that you phrased it was like this human. It moves from being something sort of inanimate to objects sort of clashing, to being something soft and compassionate, where we're actually working on a situation together. And that in Buddhism is called upaya, skillful means. And rather than sort of going at it like, how do I teach the Dharma, or how do I help people awaken through sort of applying a philosophical approach, in Zen practice, that transaction or that transformation, one could call it, is really where the emphasis of our practice is. So when I'm interacting, the first thing is to be aware of, am I looking at this situation or this relationship, this interaction, as a meeting of two separate objects? Or am I able to recognize, to acknowledge this fundamental connection that's there, whether I acknowledge it or not, and practice, to incorporate practice into this interaction, awareness, wisdom, compassion. I was just talking to somebody recently, I can't remember who it was now, about these simple practices like metta, loving kindness. In that interaction, if for just a second you can engage in this practice of wishing a difficult person well. Someone comes at you and And your initial reaction is to like back up and sort of like make distance. But if you just take a second and sort of try to embrace where that person is coming from, what their day might have been like, and just the practice of metta is just this simple embodying of this intention of well-being. So may you be free from harm, may you be free from anger, ill will, and enmity. It's a simple thing. But if you can generate this towards a person, it's way more difficult to space, to make a distance between them. And you'll find that how you're interacting with people transforms very easily from this object-object thing to a dynamic, humanizing, awakening relationship. So the way, to answer your question, the way that this is done, you can't connect with this principle of interdependent origination or connection from an intellectual perspective. You can't think yourself there. You have to be able to engage in it in the practice of it. So thinking helps. I can't like totally cut it off. But sort of what happens is our experiential habit energy is so strong. And I mean, I think this is true for all of us. We think, I'm going to go into this Christmas season and I am going to be a bodhisattva. All of this practice I've been doing is going to be great. And then you sort of open the family front door and your mother says, "Oh, you didn't cut your hair." And you go, and all that sort of like mental, all of the sort of intellectual conceptualization of Buddhist practice goes out the window, and what you're left with is sort of where the rubber hits the road. What do you do now? And that's what I'm talking about when I talk about, so we've done all this practice, and it's called practice. And now we go into the sort of family environment, and that's the real show. There's I think for most of us, there's not much harder than the family environment. It's like a bunch of samurai that know all your weak points, right? And you've got to sort of, you can make a movie about it. And that's how it. The thing that I really love about Zen practice is exactly that. It's I think a lot of us read a lot about Buddhism, investigate the philosophy, and really, I think it's really easy to love it, to love the philosophy. But the philosophy doesn't help you in that moment. It's the practice. So that's why when we come here, we engage in all of these roles, and we have these ridiculously detailed sort of tasks to do sometime. And we have all these sort of accountability and responsibility chains, and the Eno's got to make sure that the teacups are in the right place and all this kind of stuff. And what we're doing in that is we're making relationship. The Jikijitsu is called the Zendo father. The Shoji is called the Zendo mother. How do we relate to our mother and our father in this sort of contrived, controlled environment? And what we have is this space in which we can witness our reactions in a much more controlled way with people who are actually also engaged in the practice of awakening, like they're interested in you doing well, which isn't always the case in the family situation, right? I want you to fall apart. So the more dynamic that is, and the more we engage, I guess you could use like a martial metaphor, like, you go into this environment and train in these particular skills with a bunch of people who are actually not interested in killing you, but in preparing you to be well equipped out there where somebody might be wanting to kill you, right? And that's the same thing that we do here. We create this environment which is safe and solid, and the idea is that you can come in here and fall completely flat on your face trying to do this stuff, and nobody's going to take advantage of you for that. They're going to help you up and say, let's try again, right? So that you can actually develop the practical skill, not just the intellectual understanding, but what happens when I get caught totally screwing up what I'm supposed to be doing. How do I respond to that? Do I just fall into this defensive mode, or am I able to say, oh man, I totally screwed up and I need to start over again? So that when we go out into our lives and our families and they hit that button, we don't just immediately drop everything that we know and start just acting habitually. We can actually stay present with the discomfort, with the embarrassment, with the emotional discomfort, and actually respond from a place of balance. So that was a long-winded answer.
No, well, yeah, but kind of converted.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Very welcome. Yeah.
I just wondered if you could say a few words about the idea of right speech, right talk.
Right speech.
Well,
Yeah. Well, all of the rights, right? Right is it's always a very interesting translation, because all this stuff is in translation. And English language is fundamentally dualistic, right? It's Judeo-Christian in a lot of ways. It's got this sort of innate right and wrong, good and evil in the language itself, which doesn't necessarily exist in the Sanskrit, which it sort of originates in. So we always have to be careful when we're talking about right, that it's not, because I think when we talk about right, where we come from is good speech, or like pure speech or something like this. And I think it's more helpful to understand all of these rights, which I can never remember properly. But I know that the first one starts with right view, and the important thing is it's like complete speech or complete view. And so all of these, what are they? Right? That's the noble eightfold noble path, right? Ennobling path. So, if we start with the first one, which is, for lack of a better translation, right view, this is a matter of being able to see the cosmos as they are. So all of the other steps on the Eightfold Path really fold back into this first, being able to see things as they are, being able to understand something like interdependent co-origination. When we have that view, we have the whole view. And as a result of having the whole view, we begin to behave differently. When we look at things as being cut off, we can say we're not manifesting, we're not acting out of right view or a complete view, we're manifesting out of a divided view. And so when it comes to all of these other rights, something like right speech, we have to understand this as speech which reflects the complete view. So it's not like, this is really complex. So when we get into, is it complex? When we get into things like the sila, the precepts in Buddhism, this is why it's always, we have to be very careful about how we approach this, because it's like each of the sila are not absolute, they're not commandments. So it's not like thou shalt not lie, right? We recognize that this life is dynamic. So there's going to be situations that arise which require you to make a decision. What is the way to speak which reflects the complete view? Right? Does this make sense to you? Gosh, this is such a big...
Well, I was thinking that situation you're talking about
Mm-hmm.
with family.
Mm-hmm.
I can just say, so easy to say something to my sister,
Yeah,
and she'll just fly off the handle.
yeah,
So it's like I have to always stop and think, like, what I'm going to say.
Yeah.
Because she's difficult. And everybody else in the family is just wonderful, gets along really well, but we call her the hurricane.
yeah.
She spins around and
Well, I think...
it's that idea where you see this person and this happens.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to really be careful with everybody has to be careful in the house what they say to her.
Yeah.
Because she goes off.
Yeah. Well, this is one of the things that I'm looking at investigating as a community next year, because the past few months I've been in a lot of communication with Daitetsu, who's a monk from Great Vow Monastery that came and visited with us. And he's a very skilled instructor in something called nonviolent communication. Have you heard of this? Okay. And just interacting with him, I've come to realize what a huge impact that we can have on that situation with somebody else. We can say the same thing that we are intended to say, but how we say it can have a profound impact on how that person hears it and how that whole situation sort of unfolds. But again, with it, it totally requires a tremendous amount of self-awareness. So it's very easy to say, well, I say something and that other person just, anyone can say anything to that person and they just fly off the handle. But we also have to take into consideration ourselves and how we're communicating. And that in practice we can have a whole picture, and to be really skilled, and I guess to manifest right speech, is to be skilled in how we're communicating so that what we're trying to communicate can actually be heard. And sometimes that's to say nothing too. Yeah. So it's a very interesting subject to me, especially sort of going into this year. I've been looking at books and looking forward to sort of getting into it this year. Because my personal belief is, I think that we've been, as a culture, we're spending a lot of time and really developing means of communication, electronic communication and connection and all this kind of stuff, social media, but we're losing the skills to communicate. So it's like we're more able to offend more people at a greater scale than ever. And I think that it's something that we should really be spending some time, particularly in a community like this, developing the skills to communicate effectively and compassionately with one another. So, thanks for listening to the Living Zen podcast. If you follow Living Zen through iTunes, I would very much appreciate it if you would take a moment to let me know what you think about it by rating or reviewing the podcast, so that new listeners can also hear what you have to say. Thank you for your time and for your support.